Just want to say hi, and thanks to everybody here at the IDC Golden Jubilee for inviting me. This is like how I feel inside. I'm really excited to be here, and you will see, hopefully, through this talk, why. A little bit about myself. I'm Associate Dean for Scholarship and Innovation at the Teachers College in Arizona State University. That's my email, website, whatever. I'm going to be involved in educational design for a long time, and more currently getting into this idea of designing education. And so the title of my talk is Designing Pencils, Universities, and Everything in Between. And the way I'm going to do it is going to try to tell you, I think, a story or stories. And, stories are narratives which are either true or fictitious. They can be prose or verse. In this case, some of it may be fictitious. That's for you to decide. I will stick to prose, no verse. And hopefully I will be able to interest, amuse, or instruct you in some way. The challenge, of course, of telling a complicated story is that it looks like this, right? There are so many narrative threads, it's all messed up, and you have to come up with some kind of a way of connecting them together, which, if you think about it, is the design process. That's how the design process is. It's complicated, it's messy, and that's, I think, what makes it fun. So to start at the beginning, this is a quote from B.F. Skinner saying that I did not direct my life, I did not design it. I never made decisions, things just came up and made them for me. And I think that's sort of how my life has sort of been as well. I was born in Cuttack, grew up in Assam and Mizoram, and the reason you see this little cartoon of a cowboy is when I was growing up there, everybody in Mizoram, kids in Mizoram, can draw really well. And they used to love cowboys, and they used to draw these cowboys, and I would try to imitate them, and I was miserable at it, and they would make fun of me. When I was 10 years old, I moved to New Delhi, and suddenly nobody there used to draw, and I became the artist. And so that told me something, that talent is contextual, right? That talent, it's not that I was born with this talent. And suddenly, because people saw me as being this guy who used to sketch well or something, I started paying more attention to it. It got more attention. And so I keep drawing. I doodle all the time, even today. And I wondered what my life would have been like if that transition hadn't happened. So the talent or whatever has happened in my life is because my father got transferred from Mizoram to Delhi. It's kind of interesting to think about that. Growing up, I used to love to read all kinds of things. It didn't matter what it was, whether it was science or poetry or literature. And then the big sort of troublesome 4 years happened. I ended up going to BITS Pilani to get my undergraduate in engineering. I called it the 4-year transformation. It sort of looks like that. It's the reverse of evolution. I went in a smart, enthusiastic person, and I came out looking like that creature on the end. And one day in the civil engineering department, I saw a poster for this place called IDC, and they had a program in visual communications, and I had been interested. I was writing short stories, I was writing film scripts, I was doing whatever I could not to do engineering. And I said, okay, I want to go there. It's a long story. Ask me later over beer. I'll tell you how it all ended up happening. But I ended up here at the Industrial Design Center getting a degree in visual communications. These are some of the people who made my life special. That's a funny photograph. That was Raghavendra Reddy is the blur because he went and put the timer and then ran back. Of course, mistimed it. This photograph is interesting. I used to go through this phase every year where I used to shave my head off. I don't know why. Now I realize I shouldn't have. I should have stayed on, enjoyed it while it lasted. But so be it. So visual communication design, we know all the faculty here. I remember Ravi's first class. I remember Katie's first class as if it is yesterday. I remember RK's first 5 minutes as if it was yesterday. And so, there's a whole bunch of things that we learned. And if you look here in this photograph, that's actually Ravi's mustache right there. And that's me trying to make sense of a cutting board. I didn't even know what a font was. This is, you're talking about way before Macs and typefaces and fonts everybody knew of. I remember in the interview, they asked me a question. I designed a poster for the festival, Oasis Festival in BITS Pilani, and I think RK asked me, what's this font? I had no idea what typeface that was. And it was Helvetica. That tells you how little I knew. But the saving grace was this little device in the middle, which actually allowed me to be a designer. And this is still in the office, I think, upstairs. So it's a great photograph. I really like this photograph. But what's interesting for somebody who did not know anything about typeface and so on, I just fell in love with typography. I fell in love with typefaces. I fell in love with the shapes, their meaning. and started playing with them in interesting ways. And the person very influential in that was RK. And RK had this, I won't try to imitate him, but everybody who has ever interacted with him knows what a special talent he had. He had the ability, he had a stammer. And you would think that for an educator, that would be the worst thing possible. But no, he made it into an advantage. He could hold you by the edge of your seat by just, it's like, what's the next word going to be? Please finish it. I don't know what it's going to be. And on top of it, he had this lovely sense of play where he would just, do these happenings and he would tell us about all this stuff. And so, sense and nonsense would change places. It was amazing. And I remember Katie bringing some cauliflower into the classroom once and talking to us about fractals, which led to this kind of a design, which is a typographical way of representing the idea of a fractal, connecting to ideas of how Indian temples have this fractal architecture, this idea of self-similarity, which led to this design, which is the word self-similarity as a fractal. So clearly those were very influential and powerful days for me there. I worked 1 year after graduation, failing to teach Anirudh how to use a Mac. So what do you say? The first design degree show happened, so that was exciting when I was here. But most importantly, I realized that I had found a home, I had found a family, I had found a community, and I had found a history and tradition which welcomed all these random things that I had been interested in, which did not work when I was in BITS Pilani, right? And most importantly, I was blown away by this idea of design, right? And of seeing myself as a designer. And though I never really saw myself as becoming a designer per se, my interests were always in education. But this idea of design has stayed with me, and that's where I ended up going to the University of Illinois, getting my PhD in this idea of hoping to bring this idea of design into education. So I got my PhD in educational psychology. Most of my work was in educational technology. One day I was reading a book called Discovering by Ruth Bernstein, and I read one throwaway line. It said there are like 400 different representations of the periodic table of elements. I said, I know the representation of table hota hai, wall pe lagta hai, kya hai ye? And these were the kinds of things that were there. And I was just like, what the heck is this? And that sort of got me into this rabbit hole, started thinking about that. And sort of two insights came from that. The one is what an amazing amount of creativity is being shown by chemists. And at the same time, we completely deny it to our students. We don't allow students to play with the elements as if they are Lego blocks, to come up with their own tables, while scientists are doing it all the time. And the second thing that was really interesting was that there was this interesting mix and match between the technology of print and the nature of the representation of the scientific ideas. Because most tables, if you remember your your periodic tables look like this. Well, actually they should look like this. And the reason they look like this and not this is because it becomes too long to fit on a page in a book, or the cells become too small, right? And so that got me thinking that, what would happen if I could create a piece of software that would allow you to zoom in, zoom out, navigate the elements in different ways. And so that ended up becoming my PhD dissertation, which is called Flexible. So I created this software called FLIPS, which is Flexible Learning in the Periodic System. This software doesn't work anymore because none of the plugins and anything works anymore, but it was fun while it lasted. And so one of the things that when you think about education and design is that what we do is we design artifacts, we design things. They would be lesson plans, they could be apps, they could be furniture for a classroom. Those are things as designers that we do in the space of education. So I wanted to keep that in mind as I keep forward with the story. After my PhD, I went to Michigan State University, started working a lot with technology and working with teachers on how they could creatively and thoughtfully integrate technology in their teaching. And I have honestly built a career out of stealing ideas from IDC and my experiences here and applying it to education, because there they think this is very innovative and new. I was like, yes, it is very innovative and new. I just came up with it myself, except that I stole it from IDC, right? So all my classes were based around design. So if you look at my publications and writing, you'll find there's a whole series of articles on publications I've written about design as a way of teaching X, Y, or Z. Because it was very important to understand that spoon feeding in the long run teaches us nothing but the shape of the spoon. And so what you do is you put people in complicated context in which they have to struggle with trying to figure their way through, to design their way through these challenges. This led to a framework for teaching with technology, which is a different story altogether, but I wanted to mention it because at some level it ended up making my career because it got cited a lot and so on and so forth. So the second thing when you think about design and education is that the artifacts, the second thing you're thinking about are processes. That you're designing these processes that allow students to explore ideas, to play with ideas, whether it's through a software, whether it's through design-based activity and so on. A third, sort of a different strand of my work was focusing on creativity and the ways in which when we think about, the ways creative people think across disciplines. So this is some work around what we call transdisciplinary creativity. I've always been interested in the idea of aesthetics and learning. When you talk to a mathematician, they will often talk about a proof as being beautiful. They will talk about elegance of an idea. And so there's a framework for thinking. So we have this, I have a couple of pieces I've written about how one has an aesthetic experience while learning something. Because that has always been very meaningful to me. I loved learning because it gave me pleasure, not because it would get me a job, right? So that's sort of the third element of sort of the design as a space for design in education, which is the design of experiences. So as, interaction design deals with this all the time. People who are designing sort of how bank tellers function are dealing with it all the time. What is the nature of the user experience? And I'm talking as an educator. From that point of view, what is the nature of the learner's experience? You could have a wonderful set of artifacts. You could have an amazing process, but if you're not thinking of the experience of the learner or you're not designing it properly, it's all going to fail. So after 18 years at Michigan State, I ended up here in Arizona State. It's number one in the US for innovation, right? And this part of the reason for moving to ASU was to sort of expand my sort of skill set and knowledge about thinking about design, of going beyond artifacts, process, and experience to thinking about systems and culture. Because if you think about it, every aspect of education is designed. And one of the things to think about here is that if we complain about the education system, we have to understand one thing, that the education system is producing the results that it was designed to produce. If our students are not enjoying school, it's because we designed it in a way that they will not enjoy school. If our education system is producing students who are not thinking creatively, it's because we have designed a system that does not allow them to think creatively, right? So every aspect of education is designed. And so this led to this framework that is my current work, which is what we call the 5 spaces for design in education. I've already introduced 3 of them to you. So, of course, artifacts, processes, experiences, and the next 2 are systems and culture, right? So I was just talking with Professor Atwankar earlier. I'll give an example of a school redesign that we were involved in. The design team there, which included administrators, teachers, parents, architects, a whole group of people, community members, business leaders. One of the things that they came up with was like, how cool would it be if kids came to school only for 3 days and for 2 days, they would go out into the community and they would work in a shop somewhere or a factory or whatever. Then we would think of ways of making that happen. And everybody was really excited by that because it changed learning from being stuck in a classroom to being out in the world. Well, guess what? Arizona has a rule about how many hours of seat time a student needs to have. And whoever came up with that rule 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago, who knows, came up most probably with the best of intentions. But that's a constraint. And so that's a systems-wide change that needs to happen. There was no way for that school design that we could do that. So our idea had to go away and we had to come up with something else, right? And the biggest thing is if something has to become instantiated and continue, it has to become a part of the culture. I mean, that was one of the most amazing things, I think, the people, Nadkarni in particular, but all the other faculty and who were selected to be a part of IDC, that's why it's been so influential to all of us, because a culture was developed early on. I always find that interesting that when I look at students who are studying engineering, for instance, they will say, I am studying engineering. They will not say, I am an engineer. You take a 3-year-old kid and you start them swimming and they will say, I am a swimmer. Even though if you leave them there, they're going to drown. But they are a swimmer, and they are a swimmer. They're just a bad swimmer. They're a learner swimmer. It's okay. right? And in IDC, what we did, I realized this even in my first few weeks here, suddenly we were all calling ourselves designers. Like, how did that magic happen? That change of identity happen? That's a culture has been designed which allows for that process to happen, right? And so the question becomes, if you look at education, and that's what my focus is, if you look at through these 5, the question then becomes, what do we as designers bring to the equation, right? And what we bring to the equation, we bring attitudes and mindsets about how we approach problems, how we think and act. There is an openness to opportunity. There is empathy for the people we're designing for, in this case, teachers, in this case, learners. Designers, we come in with a creative confidence. We come in thinking that, yeah, we can make this better. We really can. That comes with optimism. And there's a tolerance. Okay. There's a tolerance. In fact, there's an actual love of ambiguity. So there's some research by Nigel Cross which shows that when designers are given simple problems, they actually make it more complicated. Which is fascinating, which tells you a lot about designers, because they're like, itna simple to ho hi nahi sakta yaar, koi cheez itna simple hota hi nahi hai. Right? There's a willingness to try and prototype and fail and try again. So what does this mean in practice for the work that I do today? We are involved in sort of large scale sort of co-design projects. This is one of the largest ones we did, which is like around 170 people, all collectively engaged in sort of thinking about what high school can and should be, right? We did groups with students. I mean, what's amazing is when you do this school, in this large group, it was predominantly all the white affluent parents showed up. When we went and did the same thing in an after-school session with a bunch of parents who were Hispanic parents, we got a completely different perspective of what high school should be. And when we went and talked to the kids, and we had to push the school to allow us to work with kids across the spectrum because they kept sending us the best kids, like all the kids who were making A's. That's not the group that we need to hear from. They're doing fine, thank you. I mean, they might not be enjoying all of it, but they're okay. When we got the kids who are not doing well, the biggest thing that came up was respect. They feel disrespected. They are 16, 17 years old. They have to get a hall pass to go to the bathroom. In a year, they can go and fight for their country and kill for their country and die for their country, but they need a pass to go to the bathroom. Now, that's a culture. That's a system. It's way beyond the artifacts and processes and experiences, right? All of those play into it, but you have to design at that level, at that scale. And I'm really proud that today there is a school in this district close to where I live, where 90 kids are getting a completely different experience of what schooling can and should be than other kids. And that was work that was done by my team, so I'm really proud of that. We are also involved in sort of the teaching about these processes. So we have a game which we call the school design game. There's a version 1.0 that's there, which we have piloted in a couple of places. We are sort of doing research on this process and so on. All this said and done, one of the things that really is important for us to think about is that design and creativity are neutral tools, in the sense that if you think about the Holocaust, that was a designed thing, right? So just by itself, just because we are designers, doesn't necessarily mean that what we do is always necessarily good. Can everybody read this? What do you read? Good? Evil. Okay, all the people who read evil, please leave. I don't want to talk to you anymore. No. But the point is this, that design, we tend to think of design as being inherently awesome. It's not necessarily so. And so one of the things we have started thinking a lot about, working a lot in, is how do we bring a core set of values into this design process? Then the question comes up, whose values? My value, your values, right? How do we decide that? And that is a negotiation. It's a public thing. It has to be thought through and discussed and so on. And so this is some of the work we are doing in what we are calling principled innovation meets design. So that's some work that's currently going on. I'm actually making an invitation to all of you. There's a website called talkingaboutdesign.com, which is created by a bunch of students of mine. They sort of took the initiative and ran with it. And so they're taking this sort of 5 spaces for design. And we've been writing all kinds of blog posts and pieces. Would love to hear from you. In fact, there's a whole space there where you can ask a question. You can ask a question and answer a question if you want to, or just send us a comment. So it's talkingaboutdesign.com. Coming full circle, I had started with this quote that design is not for philosophy, it's life. And one of the things that that IDC taught me is that the real voyage of discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes, is looking at the world through new perspectives, always, every day. So with that, I have a deep sense of gratitude for those 2 years, 3 years of my life here, because I think they completely transformed the arc of my career. And there is no way I can express my what I owe to this institution, to the faculty, to my colleagues and friends and staff. And so in terms of what I have given back to IDC, so here is my contribution to IDC. It is called the Dictionary of Design. So the year that I was working here, I spent time, just for the heck of it, started taking words and coming up with silly definitions for them. It still exists on the IDC website, as I discovered last night. So I'm very happy to know that it still exists out there. Here are a couple of examples of this silliness, and I want to thank a couple of my friends who helped with this. So beauty is the lie in the eye of the beholder. Calligraphy is one need never cry over spilled ink. Closure is the mind of the designer after generating the first concept. Icon is a designer's admission of guilt. And originality is copying from some unknown designer. There are some which are specific to IDC. For instance, guide, someone who doesn't. Project report, the official story, or the only truly creative part of the entire project. And proximity is the probability of signing for someone else in the attendance register. I don't know if you still do those things, but back in our day. All right. So symmetry is a place where all designs go at the end. Takes a second. All right. And Ulm is the beginning of all our problems. It's pronounced Zulm. So you have Bauhaus, Ulm, and so this is Ulm ka Zulm that we lived through. So with that, I really want to thank all of you for giving me this intellectual home, giving me this intellectual family, this community, and this history and tradition to be with. I had started with hi, so I will say bye.